On July 15th, 2007, the St. Joseph News Press of St. Joseph, Missouri published the transcript of an anonymous phone call that the newspaper had received. "Flash," the message began. "More news from the post office, behind the lines. A certain supervisor at the post office has thrown away 4 netting trucks worth of mail. Mail that might contain checks, a letter from grandma, your bills. This needs to be looked at by a clerk. Instead, the supervisor threw away 4 netting trucks worth of mail." The newspaper dubbed this caller Postal Deep Throat. That same day, the New York Times published letters supporting General Wesley Clark's comments that Al-Qaeda posed a greater danger to the U.S. than the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. This is What a Year. Welcome to What a Year, the show where we pick a year and spend 10 episodes assembling a time capsule of movies, music, and other cultural odds and ends. I'm Ethan Warren.
And I'm Ryan Pollie.
And this week we are talking about our 7th contributions to the 2007 time capsule, Bon Iver's For Emma Forever Ago, and Andrew Dominik's The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Plus, I will be testing Ryan's ability to guess the dumbest thing that got said in 2007. And then I'll be talking to senior editor at Relevant Magazine and comics aficionado Tyler Huckabee, who is contributing the Marvel miniseries Civil War to the time capsule. So let's get into it.
We're about to talk about one of, if I were to make like a top 10 significant and influential indie records, and I think this would be, you know, like when, and what I mean by that is like, and we're talking about Bon Iver here. What I mean by that is I get sent a lot of like kid bands by like younger artists, and I hear a lot of Mac DeMarco, and that's awesome because Mac DeMarco is an artist who loves the Beatles and Jonathan Richman and writes really cool songs, right? And I'd rather kids be influenced by him than so many other pieces of music. But it is interesting when you hear influence, you know, like that strongly across a whole generation. And I think Bon Iver specifically, for a lot of people more our age, I think was like that. Like I can hear Bon Iver's influence on myself. I can hear it across like. And it's crazy because at the time this record comes out and it sounds like lo-fi and like indie and like small, but like listening back to it, it's like a really well recorded, great record, you know? Yeah. But it was like the narrative made it. But then I guess also it didn't sound, if we're talking about the sound of it, it doesn't sound like a studio record. In a similar way to like my records don't sound like, you know, like they don't sound like Capitol Studios, or they don't sound like the new Killers album, or that's a bad example because Jonathan Radio kills it on those. But like I'm trying to think of the right band, like a band that would go into a studio. You know what I mean? Maybe the Strokes or.
You tell me. I mean, there's that term produced. You know, does this album sound produced? And I don't really know what that means. You know, this one sounds, there's not a lot of like trickery. There's some auto tune and buttloads of layering, but that all feels like stuff you could do at home.
Yeah. But yeah. And he even had referred to the recordings as demos at one point, and was kind of like, how do I get money to maybe redo these properly? And I don't think was recording, I think was in enough bands that had done enough recording in his life that I don't think this record was him being like, all right, now I'm going to like try to like be a musician for real, or like now I'm going to step it up and make it really great. I think it was more just like, I'm going to do whatever. Like with me, it's like, okay, whatever I'm writing right now is the next record, right? And it's not like this grand plan. It's like, okay, if I got sick and had to stay at home and wrote a record, like that would be the story, right? And like his story is so cool. It's just like you know, the story is part of the record, but I really do think it was just the songs that he was writing at the time. I don't think it was like this grand concept of anything. I think it was just another record in his life that ended up just shooting him off into this crazy fame stratosphere. But do you want to talk about the story?
I think you should tell the story for sure, because even I've been listening to this record for 15 years, and I had shifted the story around in my head. I had forgotten the details of it. So even for people who feel like they know sort of what this is all about.
I almost want to hear your, because like it's like
my fake
American
version
myth. Yeah, the folklore, right? Because like he's one of those artists that certainly when you think of like modern culture, it's really hard to get that aspect of folklore, like we love Over the Garden Wall, I think, because it like hits, like there's sometimes these projects that like hit the true American myth in real time and don't need like time to pass necessarily for it to become that, and this is one of those.
That's
like,
a great way
like,
of thinking of it.
Yeah, like this is true American folklore, like in real time. So that's why in that sense I would love to hear what it is in your head.
Well, so I knew the rough shape, which is this guy went through an extraordinarily hard time, and he decamped to his dad's cabin in the woods in the snowy winter and made a record. I had just turned the tragedy into something much more extreme. I think I had killed his girlfriend in my head.
Sure.
Because the Emma of the title, which I think he has in interviews said like that's not a person, that's an idea. But I really took it quite literally and said, so this is.
I think you can. And I think the record certainly sounds like she died, but you got everything right except for that.
Yeah. I mean, so I had just inflated it into an even more mythic tragedy.
But I think if you're, a therapist, like, I've heard from a lot of people in the mental health community that, the grief process of the end of a really serious relationship can be a lot like losing someone in a death.
So was there a breakup here?
Yeah, but really, and Emma is the middle name of the person. So yeah, it's an idea. It's but I think that's the artist way of kind of just like, man, I really don't want this to be super, super, because the album already is so personal that if a journalist is like, will you tell us that it's about one girl? And so the whole world knows that it's about this one person and she can have that in a newspaper and be even more scared about it. Like,
well, I think just automatically, do you want it to be in conversation with Blood on the Tracks? Because the minute you say it's about a breakup, it's going to get compared to Blood on the Tracks.
Interesting. I mean, I'm shocked that doesn't pop up more like that. I mean, maybe it was. Maybe I wasn't into that record yet in my life when this record came out. But so maybe those comparisons were made and I just flew by it because I wasn't like the Dylan head that you were at the time. But like, I think you can say this is about a woman that I broke up with without that comparison. I think so. And it doesn't sound anything like, well, actually, interesting. That's an interesting sonic comparison too. 'Cause like, I forgot that, like, the record, it's so sneaky and it's so beautiful the way the record is sequenced and constructed, because it starts off so intimate and like the buzzing of strings, and like he puts more of his like unfinished stuff at first. So it pulls you into this like, holy crap, this is just like a dude in a cabin and some guitars. But then suddenly he sneaks in trumpets and these produced layers of lush vocals, and like he is an incredible, like the thing is, for it to sound not produced to you, which is, I think, is a fair thing to say, because I think when people say this sounds produced, what they mean is overproduced, and what you mean is not produced. You mean not overproduced, is what I would argue. But I think that's the nomenclature around it and how people talk about it. Is this sounds produced means this sounds overproduced, and this doesn't sound produced means it sounds natural and organic. But I would argue that means he's a really good producer, because I think a lot of people, when they want to make their own albums, get lost in what should it sound like. And for him to make the choice of like, this is what it's going to sound like, and reshape this like vocal harmony American moment along with Fleet Foxes, I guess, but like in this, I don't think in a similar way. They're two vocal harmony groups that are contemporary along with Grizzly Bear, but I don't know if you could call it all chamber pop.
Could you call it all freak folk?
Sure, I think you could call it all white guy vocal harmony band, like it's all within the same tradition. But I would argue that they really are bringing vocal harmony back into American rock music in three very distinct ways that are influential in their own right and genius in their own right. And he could be one of the, he could be argued that, between him, Robin Pecknold, and Dan Rawson and Ed Drost of Grizzly Bear, like that vocal harmony show. Oh, and I would maybe put Panda Bear and A.V. Terra in there too. Like those moments for vocal harmony and how different they are, but how strong that concept is to their records. Like Bon Iver, it's like it's cool. It's like that bedroom concept of like, dude, that's like a choir of himself. Like
which is clearly something that really appeals to you and has been influential on you.
Yeah. And like Sufjan did it, and like all these like artists that record at home or record themselves, but vocal harmony is really big to them. Building these stacks and stacks of harmonies is something that I've always loved doing since this year, maybe, because at the time I was still dialing in what I wanted to do in the studio. So, and that is what I do now. I do tons of vocal harmony. So you have to think that, that they kind of paved the way for me and tons of other people to do that. All of those artists. But yeah, I would argue that, and then the sequencing, it starts super like not lo-fi, but intimate and like really close, and then he starts sneaking in these layers of like horns, and then by the time we're at the title track for Emma, it sounds like all his friends showed up to give him a hug and like sat by the fireplace and got out their instruments and joined him at the cabin, and like apparently that's what it was. He didn't go back home yet. He found childhood friends to finish the record with. Like there was home, there was
right, because he was an hour from Wisconsin, Eau Claire, where he grew up, apparently.
Yeah, and that's where he was when he did all the trumpets, I think. And he didn't go back to Raleigh or wherever the heck he was, originally staying with. And that kind of the place where you are when you want to be creative and where you choose to go is so important, I think, to art. Like if he had stayed in the place where she was, if he had stayed in the place, and I read recently in researching that it wasn't that he left bands, but that maybe he got kicked out of bands.
The bands left him, it sounds like.
That's like, I know what the social anxiety of a band is, of like, oh my God, do they like me? Do they think my songs are still cool? Like, that might be just as hard as the breakup, So I would argue that, that he is in a really down place, and he's sick. He's got mono and like a liver, something going on with his liver. Yeah. He killed 2 deer that he ate the entire time, and then traded some of the venison meat to fix one of his guitars. But yeah, so yeah, I'm glad I remembered to talk about the sequencing, because I think that's another production choice by him that is maybe overlooked, of just like how the album is presented and shown to you. Yeah.
I mean, when it hits for Emma right at the end, it knocks me over.
Yeah.
And I had not thought about the fact that he's been withholding that, because it does. It's like, oh, here's like a song, as opposed to some of these, which are just such eerie sort of nightmares.
Yeah, and Stax kind of has that, and Creature Fear kind of has that a little. There are elements of it, but definitely For Emma is the most realized, fully arranged, multi-timbre track. And it's also maybe the most joyful.
One thing that really jumped out to me this time is in The Wolves, towards the end, when his vocals start wandering away from each other and are like overlapping and intersecting and going in different directions. It is horrifying. It is the sound of like a mind breaking down. And it is the phrase that I was thinking of earlier today is it is a haunted record, which makes it very haunting. And it's a record that scares me a little bit, dipping into it.
I have that experience do you remember the track? And I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but it's the one that goes, you know that one? When there's a stack of his voice going,
not off the top of my head.
And there's 2 tracks of recorded distorted drums in each ear. And they're like,
That's got to be what I'm talking about. Yeah. The end of the wolves. Yeah.
yeah, it probably is. Yeah. So then we're talking about the same moment, but that's my moment of feeling like, ugh. It feels like this catharsis though. It feels like he's screaming into a pillow.
So, should I talk about my own personal resonance with this for a minute?
If you're comfortable with it.
Yeah. So, do you know what I'm going to say?
I think by my response.
Yeah. Well, just that this inspired me to go into the woods by myself as well, being like, well, it worked out for him. And it's a little bit, that's the glib version. I mean, when I think about this record, I think about not necessarily 2007 so much as 2010, I guess, when I was personally at a low point and had no writing ideas, had no good car ideas, like the guy would say, and I think you should leave. And so I decided to, at my own similar low point, I said, well, I've got access to a cabin too, so I'm going to go to a cabin in the middle of the winter and see what comes out of that, and probably some genius will emerge from me. And all I really came to understand was just how incredibly isolating it is, and how much it fucks with your head. The fact that he could turn quite that level of alienation and isolation into workable art, as opposed to just having horrifying encounters with a fox that just was standing outside my window.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
That's my highlight. Is just at one point there was a fox looking at me, and that's, aside from that, was just a really bleary and unpleasant 2 weeks where I slid off of the mental axis a little bit.
And he doesn't come out with like, oh man, like I was in this shit position. Thank God I went to the cabin and did this. I don't think, I would argue that is not at all the actual story. I would argue that he is walking out of the woods with a bunch of demos he doesn't know what he's going to do with, really. Doesn't really like them, probably. Did some recordings. His liver still hurts. He's still kind of sick. He's still kicked out of his band. He still has to go home. His girlfriend still broke up with him. And he doesn't have a record deal. He doesn't have fame. He doesn't have money. And I would argue, even when the fame and money sets in, do you ever think that he's like, man, so it was worth, like that pain was worth it? I just don't think life works that way. I think it's just there was the pain, then there was the record, and now it's this situation for him. And I don't think he should look at it like the record, like, oh man, well that was, that philosophy of like, well, that was the journey of my life took, that was the river, like I needed to go through that to get this. Like I would not tell him that like, you did the hard work in life and got your heart broke, and that's why you were rewarded with this amazing life. First off, because he still suffers with mental health issues and depression and the struggle of an artist still having all of this validation and fame, which, so I don't think it's like a reward for anything. I think it's just an example of like a really dark time for somebody and a record really related to that. And like, I just would worry with our telling of the myth and the myth existing and the folklore existing, that anybody might learn from the story that in dark times, go make something and it'll change your life for the better necessarily. Because
if anything, I'm the cautionary tale version of that. Do not try and emulate this.
Yeah.
Because it's not something repeatable, and it's not something that probably should be.
Well, and it's also tied into this general narrative that the best art is created by disturbed minds or very, very dark situations, which I just want to separate the narrative from, because I've found in my life there's no better art than joyous art. There's no better art than celebrating life. And sure, I don't mean don't write a sad song. I still write sad songs. But if you look at my work, it's become more joyous because I really, truly want to actively fight this myth in my music. Take care of yourself. Have people around you that love you. Don't welcome in the image that you need to be alone and drunk and going through it by yourself to write something good or do something good, and you can be happy and you can have fun and still make something good. and worth, So this record is one of my favorite records of all time. I just get worried about that sometimes, about that narrative. It's like the movie Frank.
Totally. No, I think that's a really great point. You've got me sort of having an existential moment here too, because I hate that. It's the kind of thing that keeps people from seeking help when they need it, is this idea that if I get help, I won't do the good art. Yeah. And it is certainly not that art made in distress is inherently valuable, and that art made by people who are stable and comfortable has nothing to say. That's just not how it works.
Yeah, I know a lot of unstable, sad people who also make bad songs.
Yeah, and plenty of happy, stable people who make great stuff, because
stuff.
it's just,
you're right.
Each of our minds works in its own.
You know what I also know? I know happy, stable people that write devastating, sad stuff.
Yeah, because they have an imagination, or we are all
an outlook. Yeah, I don't know.
We are all many different things at once.
Exactly.
We contain multitudes.
Yeah. So thanks for entertaining that. I was getting a little emotional there, but that's just what happened. And what else about Bon Iver before we move on to our movie segment? You got anything else, lyrics or any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder too if the story has almost just become overwhelming for him, because I'm sure in every interview that he gives, people are still asking about this one really hard time in his life.
I wonder that about these kind of records too, where you got to go tour it, you got to go talk about it. That must be really hard, huh?
Mm-hmm. And I haven't clicked with what he has done since, and I wonder what that's about. Have I just become so attached to the idea of this record that I can't engage with him as an artist who is growing and developing?
I think so. I think this record, I look at this record not fully, but when I send you an ambient album I'm working on, or a punk project, or a metal project that I'm doing, just because I'm into that at the time, I think this is more of that for him. His other bands that he was in, you can hear his voice in it, but I think this was what if I do this, that I kind of do sometimes, where I'm what if I made a metal record to cassette? I think he's what if I load my car with guitars and drive to a cabin and only have my voice and my drums and anything that I buy in town. I think it was about the form, and he made that record in that form, and it did really well and connected with both you and I, but that was never what he set out to do with his career. He always just wanted to make music that he was into, whether he was in a band or writing a solo record. So the idea that this pigeonholes him to make that folk record over and over again, he's wait, no, that's just a type of music I like. And I think you watch him kind of get to live his dream life of, musically, artistically, in the sense that he's sick. Now I have a secure record deal. Now I have money. Now I have Kanye West who wants to collaborate with me. Right. This is always the person that I want to be. I want to be everything. I want to do, and he's produced, he's done projects that sound kind of like this. He's done projects that sound nothing like this. He's done collaborative work with the National guys and Fleet Foxes. And he's just consistently, and he's created a studio and a festival in his hometown and provided a place for bands to record. He's produced a ton of younger developing bands. He's made this festival really, really important. He's done a lot of philanthropist work. And then one cool thing that I just want to mention is when he released his album 22 Million, he did one press thing and he just sat there in his Timberwolves hat and just answered questions to pitchforks, everybody who wanted to be there, and talked about his breakdown in Greece, and said basically what you said. He was I was just kind of really depressed, so I decided to go to an island in Greece by myself. He was don't do that.
Wait, what is this Greece thing? Did he do it again?
He did it again.
I didn't know that. The chapter 2 of all this.
So he goes to Greece, and yeah, I guess this is kind of chapter 2, but not musically. I mean, this record is probably my second favorite of his after For Emma, but it is very, very sonically different than For Emma. But it's so good. Oh my God, it's so good. And he goes to Greece. I forget if it's to write or to just kind of like shake the depression, but he like goes to an island in off season, like so there's nobody there. And none of the businesses are open. He just starts having crippling panic attacks maybe for the first time in his life. And he's like going to different hotels to try to like escape the vibe of like what's causing the anxiety. And he comes home and of course still experiences really bad anxiety for a while. But he talks about it related to the record. I remember where the record opens with this sample of himself pitched up, which is like so cool because he gets, through the whole Kanye river and like the sampling river and how Bon Iver incorporated that into his music, I think is 22 million.
The Kanye river?
So yeah, so I think through working with Kanye, and also you hear the start of it on For Emma, where he wants to use his voice in these weird ways, right? He wants to, like you said, the voices wander away from each other. 22 million, he's using this instrument to sample his own voice a lot, and then pitch it up and create like a keyboard based off of his own voice. And the album opens with his voice pitched up, saying "It'll all be over soon," and that was something he sings himself in Greece at the hotel about his panic attacks and anxiety disorder. It'll all be over soon. And he builds this amazing piece of music around it finally, and this album, and then talks about Greece. He's like, if you're depressed, like don't go somewhere by yourself. Like bad idea. Which I thought was related to what we were just talking about. I've forgotten about it.
I'm looking at the track list of 22 million. It's called Over Soon, but the O's are the infinity symbol.
Oh, don't get me started.
It looks like
that's
4
cool.
O's.
I mean, that track list is a lot to look at.
It certainly is. 10 Death Breast, 715 Greeks, 33 God, 21 Moon Water.
And see, this I think is related to the Kanye River too, but that's a whole other conversation.
But wait, what do you?
I just think Bon Iver became Bon Iver the pop artist. He became. He was able to create a space for himself that is experimental pop more than it is folk or indie or.
What is the Kanye River?
That he jumped in the Kanye River in like one of those like water tubes or whatever, and rode through it and learned, I think, a lot about sampling, learned a lot about like distorted drums and I don't know. It seemed like he was very passionate about that kind of work, and it shows in his later work, I think. Like that is cool. His work with Kanye, his work on pop music, and then he brings it back into his studio space and makes like weird shit with it.
Do you have final thoughts? Should we throw it in the time capsule?
No, I mean, I think this was probably even though I would have said probably at the time that my favorite band was Animal Collective, or, I think going back to these records so far, this has had the most impact on me so far. It was just like, whoa, like this record, that's what I mean. Like maybe it was an exercise in form, maybe it is a folk record, but those songs, like it transcends genre, it transcends style and sound, and it's just you're left with these songs, and the songs are staring you in the face, and it's affecting in a way that, I mean, music is one of the most affecting forms of art for me, but this record specifically is just so affecting. Like you said, it was hard to listen to it. It was hard, even though it's beautiful, and at the time I would be walking around the pond on campus listening to it, no sweat, walking to class, casually listening to this record. Going back to it, I'm shocked by that, because it's a really, really excruciating listen. It reminds me of like if I was listening to this on a walk and someone like tapped me on the shoulder, I'd be like, sorry, no, like
yeah. It was all Skinny Love for me back then. That's the one I would walk around listening to. Yeah. I'm looking at the lyrics now. It's brutal. It's brutal.
It's brutal. All right, it's going in the time capsule.
Hooray! It hit hard. You know I like to read the lyrics off this. So the ending of Skinny Love. My 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 my. That's what it says on Genius Lyrics.
Do you want to do trivia?
I'd like to give you a quiz. Very much. So I have discovered something called the Plain English Campaign, which is handed out every year to somebody who could not simplify their language and get out of their own way. So I'm going to give you 4 quotes from people who could not get out of their own way linguistically. 2 of them were nominated for the award. 2 are just things I found that people said in 2007 that I thought was funny. And so you have to guess which of these was awarded the Foot and Mouth Award.
For bonus points related to me buying things for myself on eBay, if I can guess the 2 that were from the list and then guess the winner, I can buy myself 2 things on eBay.
You can.
But if I just guess, what happens if I guess one that was nominated but didn't win? Can I still buy myself on something on eBay?
And this show is over.
Oh, crap.
There's a lot on the line here.
Let's do it.
All right. First quote is from George W. Bush, then the president of the United States of America.
That is what I was going to say. I wonder... I was going to say before you said that, there is no way George Bush is not winning unless you tell me, like, unless you show me that in years prior he has not won. Or, like, will you tell me how many times he's won?
George W. Bush, only won 1 time.
Okay, thank you. That's the only hint I'll ask for.
I'm not going to tell you what year.
Yep, no, that's the only hint I'll ask for.
Okay. Mitt Romney won in 2012. Oh, no, now I'm just here. Now I'm just looking at the quotes. All right, so George W. Bush in 2007 said, all I can tell you is what then... No, he didn't say that. All I can tell you is that when the governor calls, I answer his phone.
Lovely. Next.
Number 1. Number 2 was Kelly Pickler, who is a singer, was an American Idol contestant, and was asked for the capital of Budapest. And her response was, I thought Europe was a country. Let's see. Budapest? I never even heard of that. I know they speak French there. Don't they? Is France a country? I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh, that poor child.
I know.
Age?
Adult.
All right.
Over 18.
Adult. Age adult.
Yeah. So then the Steve McLaren, do you know who that is?
No.
He is a former England soccer manager, so I thought maybe. And do you know who
awesome.
Wayne Rooney is?
Uh-huh.
So he was discussing Wayne Rooney, and he said...
Steve McMahon?
Maybe.
Or McLaren?
McLaren is what I have down.
Okay. All good. Keep going.
Steve right. McLaren, yes.
Okay.
Said he is inexperienced, but he's experienced in terms of what he's been through. Inexperienced, but experienced in terms of what he's been through. And then finally, a senator from Idaho, Larry Craig, had been caught tapping the foot of an undercover policeman in a bathroom and was accused of trying to solicit sex. And his response was, I have a very wide stance when I'm going to the bathroom. So those are your 4.
Okay, the fourth one, no, because totally agree. I get it. Wide stance.
You have a wide stance?
I mean,
a wide wiggly stance where you're playing footsie with people?
It depends. The football manager...
He's inexperienced, but he's experienced in terms of what he's been through.
Yeah, I'm going to say that was nominated but didn't win.
Okay.
Can you tell me if I'm right?
You're right that it was nominated.
No, don't tell me anything. It was nominated. Oh, it won?
Yeah. I said it was nominated. I didn't say anything else.
I think Bush was nominated as well.
Correct.
No,
that's right.
Okay,
that's right.
If Bush only won once.
Was this the stupidest thing he ever said?
No way.
It wasn't even, I mean, he had said far stupider things
So
before
did the football manager win?
The Football Manager did win.
And Bush was nominated?
And Bush was nominated. These guys, they seem like they have a very specific criteria, because I would say that Kelly Pickler put her foot in her mouth a lot worse when she said, "Is France a country?"
That was my favorite one.
Well, yeah.
That seems like a breakdown.
It's really tough.
I kind of want to watch the footage of that one.
George Bush won the following year. Oh, it was a Lifetime Achievement Award for his services to gobbledygook.
Okay.
His gaffes were described as covering a large number of topics.
The thing what he's saying about Wayne Rooney is 2007. He's saying that he's been through a lot as a person and personally and probably off the pitch, but that he's inexperienced when it comes to his minutes in the game and in the Premier League, maybe. So he's saying he's an inexperienced player. Well, except that he's experienced from what he's been through. You know, like
it's sort of, it's a smug award in this case. Where
it is a smug award.
We know what you're talking about.
They must be British.
Oh, interesting.
They must be for a football pundit.
Right. Okay, you're right.
And on a quote
United
like
Kingdom.
That, no way. And for Bush to not have won every single year, it must not have been
Johnson
an American
won
award.
twice. Yeah.
See, there you go. Yeah. Very British. And I would argue not very good at their job. You did it better than them.
Oh, thank you. And Toby Young in 2020, I'm just looking at the list now. He won in 2020 for saying, "I'm going to go out on a limb and predict there will be no second spike of coronavirus. Not now, not in the autumn. The virus has melted into thin air," as of 2020.
Yikes. Happy 2022.
Happy 2022.
That was 2020. That was 2 years ago.
Yep.
Wow.
Melted into thin air.
Wow. So did the past 2 years.
This episode of What a Year is brought to you by Mubi, and if you have ever heard an episode of this show before, you know that they are my absolute favorite streaming service, and I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to give you a rundown of some of the stuff that you can find on there. So try and control yourself. Keep from hitting the little skip ahead button on this podcast ad, because this is an ad with some good stuff in it. So first of all, in case you don't know, Mubi is a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. They premiere a new film every day. It might be from an iconic director or an emerging auteur, but either way, there is always something new to discover, and every film is hand-selected. So, as they like to say over at Mubi, it is like your own personal film festival streaming anytime, anywhere. And that's it for the official Mubi talking points. Now, I just get to tell you about some of the stuff that you can watch if you subscribe to Mubi right now. Like, I just watched one of their recent movie of the day picks, Lucky, the movie that John Carroll Lynch directed in 2007. It was one of Harry Dean Stanton's last roles. It's this beautiful character study about growing old and facing mortality, and it's got David Lynch in there as a man obsessed with his lost tortoise. It's just gorgeous. And plus, they just added one of my favorite movies, Rubber, by Quentin Dupieux. I hope that's how you pronounce that name, or something like it. It's this experimental narrative about a psychotic, anthropomorphic car tire that goes on a killing spree, but really it's like this fourth wall breaking deconstruction of the entire concept of narrative. It is just the best. And then, just in time for early spooky season kickoffs, as of this week, they've got Night of the Living Dead. And if for whatever reason you have never gotten around to Night of the Living Dead, it is a classic for a reason. You got to check it out. And then maybe you heard me talk a couple of weeks ago about how obsessed I am with the acid western El Topo and its director, Alejandro Jodorowsky. Well, right now, Mubi has almost every movie that Jodorowsky directed, not just El Topo and The Holy Mountain, but his debut, Fondo Elise, and his more recent memoir projects, Dance of Reality and Endless Poetry. So, that gives you an idea of the spectrum you're getting from Mubi. It's just a little bit of everything, and the uniting factor is it is all excellent. And as the saying goes, that's not all. Listeners to What a Year can try Mubi for free for 30 days at mubi.com/whatayear. That's mubi.com/whatayear. You will get a whole month of great cinema for free, and you will not regret that. And with that, back to the show.
Should we talk about some folklore?
More folklore.
I know.
Because we already talked about Bon Iver, who did a record with the guy from The National who produced Taylor Swift's album called Folklore.
Oh, okay.
And now we will talk about more folklore.
I thought you were going to walk me towards Nick Cave.
Every time we say the title, can you say it? Can I just like point to you?
Oh, sure. If you want to.
So we're going to talk about
The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. So I hold this movie, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, in my head alongside No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood, two movies that we've brought up in almost every episode of this show. Or at least I have. Because I think of them as like the three towering westerns of the year. And I picked this one out of the three. I just felt like we needed one of the three. And this is the one to me that feels like it is beamed in from another dimension. There is no movie that feels like this.
Yeah.
It stuns me from the first seconds. I mean, I was watching this alone in my house and just going, fuck. Again and again at the images and at the music, the score by
dialogue.
Nick Cave. No, really, just the score is all alone just pushes it to like.
Oh, Nick Cave did the score.
Nick Cave wrote the score with Warren Ellis. Yeah.
Oh, so he's like both my favorite part and my least favorite part of the film.
Oh, you don't like his appearance when Nick Cave shows up at the end?
Not in one bit. Or Zoe. It's my only issue with the
Zoe
film.
Deschanel.
We'll
that really, yeah.
I just think that chapter, that 20 minutes, does just cut. Snip, 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 snippety, snippety. The epilogue 2 out of 3, just cut that.
Interesting.
One. Anyway, let's get back to We'll get back to that because this movie is incredibly powerful, and I agree 100% with you. Absolutely top tier filmmaking in every sense of the word, and I am in awe of this film. So do not want to jump off the bat on things that I don't like about it. Incredible movie. Keep going.
Well, one thing is written and directed. I believe it's adapted from a novel, directed by Andrew Dominik. I believe written by him as well. And I have not watched his other movies. There have been 2 other features, Killing Me Softly and Chopper. Another one will be out this year called Blonde about Marilyn Monroe.
Oh,
I have not.
Who's playing Marilyn Monroe? I think I've seen
Anna de Armas, of all people.
Oh. Melt me into 1,000
I am very excited. But I haven't watched his other 2 because, you know, there's artists where you see their work and you say, I want so much more of this. Give me, you know, everything you have, you know. And this is one that I fell in love with this movie and just said, that's enough. I don't go looking for this feeling in his other movies because the feeling of this movie feels so singular. And it's due to a few things. The music is a huge component. It feels novelistic in the use of the narrator. It has one of my favorite voiceover narrators in any movie.
Sure, yeah.
The way that it's presented as though it's like he's presenting the news. Is
it anyone of note? What a voice.
It is not anybody who I looked it up and it was not anybody I recognized.
Yeah.
So it's
okay.
To say he is not of note would be a horrible slight against this.
No. Sorry, of note to me. I meant
not of note to me.
Is like base level film knowledge.
Well, although you know it's Andrew Dominik. He has a casting scheme in this that is really fascinating.
I don't know anything about Andrew Dominik. I only know these 2 names stacked next to each other because of this movie in this context. Like, I don't hear him brought up a lot. I don't hear when I went to his Letterboxd. It wasn't like I was like, oh, this, and this. I've seen. You know, I was just like, oh. So that makes me feel a little bit like his yeah, like where does he fit into all this? Who the heck is this guy?
He does not work all that often. He's made the 2 features I mentioned, both of which are really well loved. Chopper was a movie. I think he's from New Zealand. I think the Chopper may be an Australian movie, and was a real big Eric Bana project, where he's, I think, some sort of fighter, big muscle man. Haven't seen it. Killing Them Softly, rather, is this Brad Pitt vehicle that is a modern crime thriller. He's done a couple episodes of Mindhunter, and a couple of Nick Cave sort of concert documentary type things.
Okay.
And the narrator of this movie is a guy named Hugh Ross, who is apparently known best for voiceover work, and he's got the voice for it. It reminds me a lot of Ricky Jay's narration in Magnolia, where the narrator seems to be telling you something in a way that is very factual and dispassionate, but almost comes from a place of they are trying to piece together a mystery that is haunting them. And the opening of this movie knocked me out so much because they have to build up the idea that Jesse James is a truly, literally mythic figure, which is the context of the story. The story is about why we elevate people to mythic status, what it feels like to be turned into a myth, being turned into a myth for the wrong reasons, the costs of all of that. And
we should have done this one with Kanye.
Well, that would be a good idea. That's interesting. The opening of the movie introduces you to Jesse James by saying things like, he made the rain fall straighter. I mean, God damn it. Like,
oh my gosh, yes, I remember this narration specifically.
He slows
that
time.
One,
like, is there any better, like, sort of a real American tall tale? Oh my God,
poetic exactly, poetic in a truly American sense. And you remember when I texted you that line, he also says at the end, like, he walked around this, talking about Casey Affleck's character, Bobby Fordo. He's like, you know, he walked around the saloon knowing that their smiles disappeared once he walked by. Or like he didn't use walk twice. He leaped around the saloon knowing their smiles would disappear.
He frolicked about.
But just no. And the other one was the rain fell straighter. Oh my goodness, that was insane sounding.
Because you think of tall tale figures like Paul Bunyan as having these feats of strength. He could clear all of the pine trees, whatever. But Jesse is just this force of nature that literally he slows down the elements. The rain falls straighter and time slows down. I mean, like, let's just go take a walk for 5 minutes and think about that.
Yeah. And then visually, you think they do it with the train?
The train heist, one of the sequences of that decade. It's incredible. It takes these very familiar.
I think also the shooting is another one.
The final shooting.
The one with Hawkeye.
Oh,
the one with Hawkeye and Parks and Rec.
Jeremy Renner and Paul Schneider. Yeah.
In the movie,
Dick Little. Well, in the movie The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
There you go.
I also just love the name Dick Little. So you're saying the scene where we're going to come at this chaotically, people, and this is
no. I was just mentioning that's another scene. That's another scene for me. That's like high, like oh my God, scenes of the year type of thing.
Oh, anyway, I thought you were saying it was high myth.
And no, I was saying that's no, not related to the myth. That's, you were like, train sequence was one of the sequence of the decades, and I was like, oh, there's another one that like stood out to me like that too.
And are you saying it's the one where Jeremy Renner
where Jeremy Renner dies?
Where he dies. Okay, that's a great scene. It doesn't jump out to me as one of the best.
Oh my God, that one scared the crap out of me. And the final sequence, one of the assassination sequence too. But anyway, I getting back to building the myth. And being able to do that within the context of narration and visual storytelling, so that you believe Jesse James is as big as the country thinks he is. I mean, or like that's something I was confused not knowing about this part of American history. Like, why did kids look or like Jesse James, or why did American culture? It seemed like people were like, "Oh, cool, Jesse James."
Well,
like,
the outlaw.
How come?
The outlaw is just such a sort of I mean, it's a myth now. It was just reality then. I mean, he just had tales of grand adventure, and everything was oral storytelling then. So I think it did just get inflated by the time it made it to people. And you see that through Robert Ford, the Casey Affleck character, who
that he idolizes.
He idolizes him, and he
has his comics and stuff.
He wants to be a criminal himself, so I don't know.
So there you go. That is a folk tale being created for Bob in real time, similar to Justin Vernon.
Absolutely.
In that sense, he is being mythologized in real time, and the only person who doesn't know the real experience, or the people who don't know the only person who knows the real experience is him, of living in that shell of a myth, you know.
And so much of the movie, I think, works backwards a little bit from, well, for one thing, it literally works backwards. The title is the ending, so you never have any question of how this movie is or where it's going. And it just takes for granted that this specifically, the death of Jesse James, is an American myth. And we those photos that you see of Jesse's corpse in the ending being displayed and being sold in stores, that's all real. You can look at those actual photos on the internet if you care to. And so he's working backwards to the question of what you said, which is why, and how does it feel to be in the presence of the person who, whatever, everybody wants to both be and kill. It's a hell of a position to be in. Andrew Dominik calls this a movie about assisted suicide, for one thing, which I thought was a really interesting concept. That from the time that we meet him, Jesse would like to die. He can't live with himself and the things that he's done, and he can't live with all of the terror of somebody coming to exact revenge on him. And so he is grooming Bob from the first scenes to be his eventual killer, is Dominik's interpretation.
Yeah. You know the scene where he kills Ed?
Yes, I do.
And then immediately comforts the horse, who's like just... And there's a bunch of times in the movie where guns fire, and it's really visceral seeing the horses react to the gun firing. And I think of Jesse as both the killer on the horse and the confused horse he's riding, that he has to be like, it's okay, sweetheart. Like, you know, like the way you'd put a horse out of his misery. Like that's what Jesse wants to happen to him, kind of. Like he's both like scared and terrified and like instinctual and animal and sad and a boy, but he's also this cold-hearted killer riding on top of himself. You know, that's kind of like how I see Jesse.
Yeah, you have an empathy for animals that I don't have, not for any distaste for animals myself. It's just it's a cause that you think about more than I do. I acted like I knew what you meant about the horses. It never occurred to me. So I love that you did say that.
That's fine, because I was thinking earlier that as the music guy on this podcast, I didn't think about the score once.
Huh, okay.
It's so weird. Score, it's so people who often tell me like, oh man, what'd you think about the score? And like, I think movies just, I don't know, like I don't think about it.
It's all a big squirrel.
Yeah. So it must have been great, but I can't really remember.
I have probably listened to this score more than almost any other. Just it cool. Just has been constant for me. It's such good writing music. It puts me in such a zone. Both this movie and the Bon Iver album are such atmospheric works. They are works that really take you to a place that is alien to you in two very different ways. This is also it's a heavily stylized movie. All of the distorted lenses that they use and the way they're trying to evoke vintage photography.
Sure. Although I would say, like, juxtaposed with the most real-looking Western I've seen maybe ever at the same time. Like, some of those shots of those towns and the hills behind. I don't know. Like, I
don't know how they created that.
Me neither. It took me to that place better than any Western I think I've ever seen.
Well, he also he very specifically goes against a lot of the imagery that we think of as the Western.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah, and it's
in what way?
So I read this interview with Dominik where he talked about feeling that this was when you look at the images from this time and you look at especially the drawings of Jesse that were published in newspapers, the sort of editorial, not quite cartoons, but the illustrations that they would do. And you can find a lot of illustrations of the assassination itself, of a man standing on a chair adjusting a picture while someone else shoots him. It all looks like illustrations out of a Dickens novel. So Dominik's concept was Kansas City and Missouri in this time period looked like Victorian England a little bit. And so you don't have cowboy hats, you have bowlers. And you don't have barrels of whiskey, and you have bicycles with great big front wheels instead.
But that's not real.
Is that
real?
Yeah, he is arguing that this is the reality of that time and that he wanted to emphasize
Got it, because it was very English because it was so early.
Well, just that it was Victorian. It was the Victorian era. We just don't say Victorian in America as commonly.
Got it.
And it's similar to movies like McCabe and Mrs. Miller by Robert Altman, which is the Warren Beatty with his great big woolen coat and his bowler hat on. It is there is a style that this exists within. There's scenes in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs that feel very much like this. It's an exciting place to put a revisionist Western because you are literally revising the imagery of the Western.
Sure. In what other ways, story-wise, is this a revisionist Western?
Well,
do you know like where the story flies off from?
I don't know that
real
much.
Story?
I don't know that much about the story.
Do we know if Robert? I wonder. One big question that I wanted to look up but didn't. Sorry, listener. Was if Robert Ford performed on stage the assassination?
Oh, I have to think that's true.
Over and over.
That
again.
Must be real. I mean, that would not be insane. Something to make up. Yeah.
That idea of performance feels so old timey, and like I can buy it, but it's such a trip to think about somebody being like, I killed someone and now I make a living going and recreating that for audiences, and that's wild. That's wild to think about.
I really like the point you made though about how the brutality is existing in contrast to the beauty. The scene that you were so struck by where Jeremy Renner is killed by Bob Ford, Casey Affleck, blood flies onto the lens. Clearly fake, but it's such a visceral, like you say, it's a shattering of what we expect from a Western and from a movie. It brings it really into your face.
I didn't even notice that, but it worked 100% on me. I felt like it just
another moment where I went, fuck, involuntarily.
I think this film, it's kind of like In the Bedroom, where it builds its universe so slowly and carefully that by the time something like this happens, you are in the room.
I need to watch that movie again.
But there are, let me think of other examples. I mean, tons of great films do this, where the narrative and the character development is slow in this real way, where you're watching people reveal things about themselves slowly and in private and in different ways to different people based on how they interact with different people. And I think this is a testament to the acting mostly. I don't know because I don't make movies, but the acting I thought in this film, specifically from Sam Rockwell, Casey Affleck, and Brad Pitt, was so meticulous and slow and careful that by the time things started to unfold in this way that maybe in the beginning or something you would, without the careful building, would not have the same effect that it did. And I would argue that actually this goes the same for Parks and Rec guy too. Yeah. I think he was really, although he took me for more of a loop, like I couldn't quite figure out if he was a dickhead or if I loved him, because he was like when he was like joking about sex and like I don't know, he felt kind of like a scummy guy mixed with like somebody that I was drawn to. But I think this movie is full of roundness and full of these characters that do terrible things, but you like also speaking of having the empathy for the horse, like I think the greater challenge is having empathy for Robert Ford. But I think it works by the end, and I think, or having empathy for Jesse James, or any of these people who are living these truly, truly terrible lives, and they do bring attention to the fact that the existence of this kind of crime and this kind of criminal it is brought into existence. It is birthed by capitalism. It is birthed by war, and it is birthed by the circumstance of being someone in the situation of Jesse James. That he is not someone who has acted out of these choices to kill and to be a killer, but that he is killed out of necessity and for survival, and in a traumatic response to both a war, poverty, and his familial situation. And I think they do a good job of letting you in on that, letting you in on how truly terrible these people's lives are, so as to understand that, like, he was neither a hero or a villain. He was just a dude in a shitty existence.
Yeah. Well, so that right there is that's what makes it a revisionist Western, is just by eliminating any of the heroism there, that Jesse is, like you say, traumatized. And it, have you seen The Searchers, the John Wayne movie?
Mm-hmm.
It calls that to mind a little bit, just in terms of the showing why a guy would be the way he is if he's been fighting in the Civil War.
Sure.
The thing that makes this a revisionist Western to me is the fact that, as I texted to you, every character is a weirdo or a psychopath or both. And that is what I love about this, is they are all out of their goddamn minds in ways that are kind of cute and funny at times, like Paul Schneider acting like a weirdo, and a very scummy guy. He is actively grooming what appears to be a preteen girl at one point.
Oh yeah, that's right. They do. I was confused by that. But I was like, were they just talking about him and the girl, or are they talking about the mom? Like, okay, yep, confirmed.
And so there is just no trace of heroism. There's almost nothing to like in any of these characters, except that Jesse James is Brad Pitt, and you cast Brad Pitt to just automatically make your character appealing and magnetic. Bob is one of the most unappealing protagonists there could possibly be. There is nothing to like about that character or that performance. You want to be away from him. And that should be...
That's so interesting.
That should make the movie unwatchable.
You say that.
You don't want to be away from Bob?
Yeah. No. I'm just hearing my response to a lot of times when people say, why did you not like the film? I often hear myself saying, because the characters are so unlikable and I don't want to be around them, and there's no redemption, or there's no, but then maybe it's the way that the character development happens in this movie. I feel so bad for all of them. Yes. And I think that their quirks and their weirdos and them being psychopaths, again, is like, okay, put yourself in a situation where you haven't eaten for 4 days, and like you have no money and you're killing to survive.
You probably have some infections.
You probably have some eye ticks, or probably think about women in the wrong way, or you probably, like, say some things that you probably think about, race in a way that isn't very, like, emotionally resonant. Like, these people are scummy people, but I would also argue it's like I feel so bad for them. All of them.
I don't know that the racial politics of Jesse James were acceptable by 2022 standards.
No, I just mean, like, yeah, they're all awful, but somehow it doesn't make me want to walk out, like you're arguing for too. I think it's like, which I think you were getting to, but you were saying he is the such an unlikable protagonist. There's nothing to like about him, and yet why does it work? Like, why, I just heard myself saying, like, that's my reason for not liking films usually. So why does this work so well on both of us,
Well, I'm looking up now if there's, like, what the definition of a tragic hero would be in the classical sense, because this is a tragedy. It ends with 2 deaths. It ends with a death that is preceded by another death. And so is there any way to call any of these guys tragic heroes? Not really. They're all villains. I don't know. How to account for the allure of this movie when all of the characters are horrible is a question. And because they're not, like, charming horrible for the most part.
Maybe the conquest, the only like, if life is hell then maybe he's saying the only true conquering of life's experience in this kind of situation is death. Or, you know, that release. And that's what Jesse James wants. Like, there's nothing for you here. There's nothing for anyone here. There's nothing for your story. There's nothing for your legacy. There's nothing for heroes. There's nothing for villains. There is only this hell and what you do with that. And then there's death. And it's coming for you.
Yeah. So the journey of this movie is Bob wants to be a legend. And so he attaches himself to a legend. And he sees that being a legend is incredibly taxing. And then he becomes a legend, which is what he wanted all along.
Doesn't stop him from, doesn't stop him.
No, and he's so excited. I mean, he's clearly agonized by the premise of killing Jesse, but once he does it, it's one of my favorite moments of the movie is when he has the telegram and he runs in and gives it to the telegraph operator and says, "You might want to keep that." And he's so excited, like a little kid.
Or when he shows up to the governor's party.
Yes, and he wants to go say
and he's acting like he's just above everybody and just like he's the belle of the ball or whatever. That scene too. Yep. He's just so excited at the possibility. And like you said, it's ingrained in him. He can't turn it off. As much as he cares for Jesse, he can't turn off his destiny or his perceived destiny.
Speaking of the governor scene, do you know who plays the governor?
CNN,
yeah, James Carville. He's the political operative, now commentator, the guy who got Bill Clinton elected.
I passed the quiz.
Yay!
I get to buy myself something on eBay.
It's something that I really love about this movie is when he brings in Carville or he brings in Nick Cave towards the end to play a guy.
Boo!
I know you don't like that, but I like that he brings in these guys who can't blend in, who really confront you with the modern nature of it all. That's just something that always gets me off regardless, because James Carville is giving a performance in this that could not be more sort of stick out-y. He does.
You say that, but then he outdoes it twice more in the film.
With Nick Cave and Zooey Deschanel, I don't think of as in the same category because she is an actress.
But he's sticking out, but I'm like, okay, fine. And then Nick Cave starts singing, and I'm like, come on. And then Zooey first, or whatever that sequence.
Tell me why the Nick Cave one gets at you so much.
Well, the song's bad.
It's a real song, and it rules.
It's a real song?
Yeah, you should go listen to the Bruce Springsteen version.
Yeah, but it sounds like a singer-songwriter folk song, not of that era.
It totally is. Oh my god, yeah.
But the style that he's playing it in too.
Oh yeah,
like just an acoustic guitar, like singer-song, like folk song. That's how it's sung back then?
Oh no, it's absolutely not. And this is what I'm saying I like about it.
I was like, where did this singer-songwriter from modern times show up with an acoustic guitar? And why is everybody acting like this is normal? And then Zooey too. Like I was like, why did somebody let Zooey Deschanel in here?
That really did.
In here.
It shocked me. Yeah,
you built this movie so slowly and carefully and meticulously to bring in Zooey Deschanel and Nick Cave singing a song to shatter the fourth wall in your final act of epilogues, never-ending epilogues. Like, give me a break. Like, that's why it knocks a star off the film for me. It's like you didn't finish strong. Like you did so well and then you blew it.
I will say, bear in mind, this is not modern day Zooey Deschanel we're talking about here. She did not have the credits that New Girl is still several years off. She hasn't done 500 Days of Summer yet. She sticks out in this movie for me primarily because of her weird affect. She always sounds like she's trying to be old-timey a little bit. And so that weird...
I just didn't understand the character or why. It felt like a director reaching for his Rolodex even if she wasn't a star yet.
Yeah.
It felt like, how do we get this person in that I like? Why don't we write her into the film, have her sing a song where everybody claps, and then nobody's, just to have her come to be on set. Like, I don't do that with such an important piece of art, I'd say.
Yeah.
Give Nick Cave the score. It's great. It's like you said, it's amazing score. Great. Let's all be happy. Let's go home. Why do we need to put a cowboy hat on him and have him sing?
Yeah. There's a tweet that I really love where somebody said something like, Jessica Biel can't be in a period piece. She has a face that has seen smartphones. And that's what James Carville has a face that has seen smartphones.
That is such a weird tweet.
And I don't know, Zooey Deschanel, are you saying Zooey Deschanel has that face?
No, I'm saying that performance and that writing feels shoot in.
Got it.
Feels like we got her on set for a day. What can she do? Oh, she can sing? Cool. Let's do a singing scene. We've got these sets. Cool. Let's put the production designer. What else can she do? Well, she can say these dialogues from this character that we could write in. It has nothing to do with anything at the end of the story. You know what? Oh, Nick can come on set. Oh, we got to give him a scene, right? What can we have him do? Well, he can sing. Let's have him sing.
We have
cool.
To.
Bob Moses, we can write in. He'll fall on the ground. He'll be drunk. It's fine. It does nothing for the film except take me out of it. Those two performances.
Just as a little footnote here, the song Jesse James, it was written basically contemporaneously. It was first recorded in 1919, but it would have been written.
Let me hear that version.
Before that? You want to hear the 1919 version?
I want to hear the 1919 version and see if it sounds like the Nick Cave performance.
I'm looking it up now. You're not going to listen to it, but I am.
You're like, it's Nick.
It does not sound like Nick.
What's the instrumentation? Is it guitar?
No, it's piano. It's like, bar room kind of.
And maybe that's what it took it out. Like maybe if Nick, I don't know, but even
he's playing it in a modern way for sure.
Yeah, and I always think of those musical numbers in serious films as I always get frustrated by that. I'm taken out of it.
Yeah,
when I know it's a famous person. It's like watching The Bachelor and they go on a date to a band that has a deal with the producers from The Bachelor.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just feels yucky.
Well, they're using it in a particular way, which is what if a song was written about what a shitty guy you are while you were alive, which I guess has happened all the time, speaking of Taylor Swift. What if you were in a bar and someone came in with a guitar and just started singing a song about how you were a coward?
I think a scene like that has its merits, but I would just argue that what I love about this film is how meticulous it is, despite how slow and careful.
Yeah.
Every scene, every tick, every little thing about Sam Rockwell.
You were so in love with that performance.
Slowly builds and slow. Because I know plenty of actors that love acting crazy. Mm-hmm. I know plenty of actors that love taking a character and making him a little zany. So they get to act goofy on set and they can bring their own style into it.
Which Sam Rockwell has done many times in his career.
But to do this well and to do it consistently, to build an actual character with consistent idiosyncrasies and not just a dude acting zany for no reason inconsistently, which I think is what most actors do, is I think a talent, undeniable talent. And Casey Affleck does it maybe to an even more impressive degree in this film.
So then we should give a lot of credit to Andrew Dominik then, because consistent things doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah, I would think, but then that's what I mean, and I'm dropping this point, but it just goes against the philosophy of why I champion this film so much. Is proved it's hypocritical to love it for that reason and then like that ending. I don't know.
I am.
It reminds me of Gangs of New York.
I haven't seen that movie in a really long time.
The epilogue is like 20 minutes, and it's like they throw out all their hard work with like this really over the top, like just bloated ending. And I feel like this is that to a lesser degree, but it's still bloated.
I just texted you this song because you have to listen to it.
I can't wait. I feel like I'm going to hold it up close. Just hold it up to the mic, just so our listener can.
No, we'll drop it in for the listener.
Okay, cool. Let me hear just a second of it. Oh yeah. And if they had this like as like the ending score,
yeah,
or even had Nick Cave cover this in this style without him singing on it, but it had the song in, fine.
So I will say one more thing about this, because maybe this is kind of the thing in microcosm. If he had performed it in a archaic style, we would have filed that in our brains under history. And by confronting us with with things that feel modern, which is what this movie does a lot. It confronts you with the clouds moving really fast, that sort of classic image that we all have seen for 20, 30 years now. It brings in these things that takes you out of the idea that this is history and makes it feel much more present. And I think using an anachronistic performance like that, it lets you know how Bob would actually feel. It doesn't create that distance of, that guy's singing kind of funny. It's confrontational in a way that we feel. Clearly you don't. I feel viscerally. You feel a different kind of visceral thing.
No, and that's just something that if those modern elements were designed to try to bring me out of the movie, I very much, my watching experience very much felt like I was in the Old West. So like for me, I felt like I was there and it was real for the film until then. Whereas you felt that stylistically that was part of the style from the get, was kind of like playing with this idea of modernity on top of this classic format. And for me, maybe without that type of filmmaking brain, I was able to be like, oh, some style, but all the dialogue, all the like scenes are like so real, so immersive, and so like from the costume design to, just like the production design, it was incredibly immersive for me. So I think that's maybe that's why it took me out so much, was I wasn't taken out in the moments you were by the style, filmmaking wise.
Well, I'm also now thinking about the music. What if this was done with electric guitars? Because that would go to my point. But it's also familiar in its own way. There's been electric guitars in a trillion westerns.
I thought the score was very, very period appropriate.
Well, I'm wondering, because I'm sort of listening to it in my head right now because I've heard it so many times.
There's definitely some honky-tonk piano, like slow Civil War era piano.
It's a lot of like glockenspiel.
Oh, so is it now?
It's not as though you couldn't have created those sounds then, but it's glockenspiel, high piano.
Interesting. I got to listen to it.
It's just it's unusual for a Western. Yeah, well, no, it doesn't take you out. Certainly, it's all part of the fabric.
Are there a lot of electric guitars?
No, there's none. It is.
Oh, okay.
It's just not what you typically hear, and it creates a unique, dreamy space for this movie that also, I think, amplifies the mythic.
Yeah, but if it was like synthesizers, I don't think.
Yeah, if it was all Moogs,
you can. That's what I mean. You can play with this concept, but I think there's an idea of playing with it and it working, and then there's the idea of it going too far.
Mm-hmm. This movie does not go too far. This movie goes the perfect distance.
This movie is near perfect. I love picking apart near perfect movies.
Yeah, it's not a movie I watch all that often, because it's interesting to call it perfect, because I would call No Country for Old Men a perfect movie, and I would call this one a little weirder.
Yeah.
It's a 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah.
Which means it's perfect, but it's perfect in its weird imperfections. But I don't know. The word perfect is really fascinating to me when it comes to art, because I typically say I do not like perfect things, because for something to be perfect, I kind of envision it as like you've taken a sphere and you have sanded off every single rough edge.
What I mean by perfect is it's a realm of art that you can't touch, or even like it transcends to a point where like it's like, oh dude, like that movie, like I can't even, how could I criticize, like I'm picking it apart, but like it's what I mean by near perfect is like, oh my god, the achievement that this carries with it in pure creativity and artistic expression. I think that's what I mean when I'm like, oh, this is near perfect or that's perfect. It's like, oh, I can't even touch it. Like, how could, I'm going to talk on a podcast about it, but whoa. Like, well, so yeah.
But I have repeatedly chosen movies for this miniseries that I have said, isn't it great? It's not perfect. Like the Darjeeling Limited. I say, I love this movie because it's not perfect. And I'm tempted to put this in that category, but then when it comes right down to it, I have no criticisms. I don't think there's anything wrong with this movie. I think it is flawless. So what's
I think
my
it's flawed in design. I think it's flawed in design.
How so?
I think the type of story that is chosen, that is selected, the care and thought put into something like this, that decision to spend that energy and time and creative effort to bringing that to be, I think that's pretty crazy. Yeah, because the story is so singular and depressing, and so I think that's kind of, and I guess you could say that for No Country too, but I think No Country had more like, oh, this is gonna look cool on the screen, or like, oh, this is gonna be a big like boom 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 type of thing, whereas this one is like, you really want to tell that? That's the story? You want to? That's what we're gonna do for the next 2 years of our life? Like this is what you want to talk about? Like, so what are your views on it? Like, what do you want to say? Like, oh, you don't want to come down on anything. You just want to tell this really dark story and let the audience kind of take from it what they And I think that's where it's doomed from the get, as far as like an obvious artistic pursuit, and why it kind of stands out to me. It's like, whoa. Like the fact that you decided to do this, it's like, that's a heavy thing to do, and we all get to appreciate it. But like that sets it apart, to spend that energy on this story. It's wild. And the things he has to say and the vision about what is told through the story is insane. It's so good. Like the views on life and what it is to experience, and what a roller coaster when you think about what happens to these characters, but it all exists in this cold, dark reality, where it's like these people, it's real. These people maybe didn't experience exactly this, but this feels like this happened, and these people had to deal with this part of being alive that we don't have to deal with, and this guy decided to tell that story for a big chunk of his life and focus on showing us that. And that like gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit to think about, but it's like, woof, what a film. I'm glad they did it. I wouldn't want you to go do this film for 5 years, but
it's not just these people of it, though. It's he wanted to live inside Robert Ford's head. And so maybe the mission is, how do we make this guy who is famous for being a coward that nobody wanted to remember, how do we make him sympathetic, or how do we make him a real, not even sympathetic, I guess it's how do we turn him into a living, breathing human being when he has been turned into a footnote in history?
I loved the part where they talked about Robert Ford having the inclination to like show up at the victims of Jesse James's house and be like, hey, like, I'm Robert Ford, like I killed Jesse James, just to like see if they'd hug him, or see if somebody would finally welcome him into the space that he thought he would be into.
He just wants someone to say thank you.
Yeah, it's just, that was just heartbreaking to me. Of just and I don't think he did do it. It just like kind of showed the people on a train, or showed their faces, but it didn't show him going.
It's such a good moment, because those aren't the actual people. I think there was he's riding a train.
People on a train. He's just imagining them.
They're implying that he is seeing Jesse's victims everywhere without actually saying that, and it is so cool.
I mean, it's one of those films. Sometimes you read about, like, I remember reading about the kid who was in Hereditary, the boy who's now a man. Well, he
one of the Wolf brothers,
being a boy. He returns to being a boy in the film Old, and then becomes a man again.
Right. I think this is Nat Wolf, not
so
Alex Wolf.
I remember he was just, this is an example of a string of an issue that is not talked about enough in filmmaking.
I got it wrong. It was Alex Wolf.
Alex.
Go on.
So something that I think is not talked to. Obviously I'm a mental health advocate, but I think actors and people who are involved in people's creative vision, specifically in the industry of filmmaking and music making, oftentimes you're brought into the world of those personalities, and that vision comes along with obviously a genius creative singular thing, but it comes along with a lot of dark energy if it's a dark project. And the kid from Hereditary was like, yeah, that movie really messed me up. Any other questions? And I think that, that's just it has been talked about, and actors do share that, and people who have worked with directors, and it's coming out more and more that even at the top A-listers have to deal with this, being brought into projects where directors treat them like trash, or actors treat, it just seems to be this like HR non-existent creative the creative is valued, but it excuses sometimes people to, I guess what I'm getting at is, are these people who are involved with this project okay? I hope so.
I hope so too. I don't know.
Specifically the writer, director, and those actors. I don't know, man. That's the actors live for these experiences, to perform as someone else. But for Brad, I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen him do something like that, and yeah, I hope everybody was okay, because I know that there aren't, like, when you do a film like that, I don't think there's like assigned therapists or mental health professionals to like all the cast and like, I don't know if it's like one of those things. It's probably like, oh, we're going to do this movie. It's really dark, but it's going to be great. And then everything that comes along with that, which is a lot of darkness.
I think people are getting better about having sensitivity handlers and all of that. But there are definitely directors, and I have no reason to believe that Andrew Dominik is one, but there are directors who see it as a sign of status, that they can be awful to people, and it is it's inhuman, and it's a bummer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want, and it is fascinating to me also, when I was saying like what a decision to spend this amount of time on a project like this. It's fascinating to me that he's only done a couple films. And I wonder then if I'm incorrect in saying that I am blown away by someone wanting to spend this chunk of time on it, when in actuality, it might be quite a bit of this man's life spending his time on this story. Because oftentimes when it's less of a prolific filmography, it often clues you into these projects that are fully baked within long periods of time. And so, geez, I mean, that's like a Christ moment for this guy, that he's like sacrificed a third of his life maybe for us to enjoy this film. And he did it so well, but God bless him. But whoa,
I was not expecting us to end up with comparing Andrew Dominik to Christ by the end of this, but he suffered for us.
Well, you also suffered through all of my things that I had to say about it, so thank you.
No, it looks like it was probably a really taxing thing to do. I mean, I think these kinds of movies are often physically uncomfortable to make. You're in tough conditions. And so
that's a difference between albums. I feel like albums and films, specifically adaptations or narrative projects that you assign yourself to. I mean, with the music and the albums we're talking about, like the Bon Iver album is very much a record that was what he was feeling and making at the time, but then he gets to move on, and if he's happy, he gets to make a happy, whereas like films, it's like, I want to do this project. And if you signed on to do the Jeffrey Dahmer story, like, okay, great, but like, be prepared to devote yourself and a lot of your creative energy and your headspace to a lot of dark punishment.
Well, Tarantino has talked about that, yeah.
Has he? What is he?
In terms of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he says, it took me a long time to be ready to make this movie because I knew I was going to have to give a lot of my brain over to the Manson family for a while, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Yeah.
Yeah, spooky.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can't handle that type of storytelling, but yeah, this has been an incredible talk, and what an incredible two pieces of art to spend the day talking to my buddy about. So
put it in the time capsule, please.
Yeah, here it goes.
That's appropriate. That's an appropriate sound it made falling.
Yeah, it's heavy.
It's heavy. So I am so excited to welcome to the podcast Tyler Huckabee. Tyler is a senior editor for Relevant Magazine. And for our 2007 time capsule, he is contributing Marvel's Civil War, which is a massive crossover event that ran for about a year and then wrapped up in the spring of 2007 and was collected, I think, in paperback in that spring, and certainly when it came into my life. So Tyler, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks a lot for having me, Ethan. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm a little nervous.
Well, to get started, can you tell us sort of do you have any like associations with 2007? Where are you at in your life at that point?
Sure. So 2007 was the year I graduated from college. I went to a very, very conservative Christian college in Chicago, which was where I was at. It was in downtown Chicago, but it was quite fundamentalist. And so I was kind of like, at that point in my life, like I was feeling sort of torn between this like college bubble that I was in that was pretty limiting, obviously, in a lot of ways, but also being in that city and being exposed. I was raised in a pretty small town, so being exposed to a lot of really cool other influences and making a lot of friends outside of that campus bubble, and the friends that I had inside of there, we were like having a lot of fun outside of Chicago too. So I've kind of felt not trapped a little bit, but I felt like I was maybe emerging from one era of my life into another era, which I've probably, which set a big trajectory for my life. So 2007 was a big year for me. It was very formative in a lot of ways. Got my first post-college job there in Chicago after I graduated, and all, you know, all the stuff that comes with like, oh no, I'm not in college anymore. I don't have any structure. I'm like just falling into the void, and there's nothing left for me to like really like look forward to until what, I retire. Like, it was, you know what I mean? Like, it was a very strange, but in retrospect, very, very fun part of my life too. So that was my association with '07.
I am very familiar with the post-grad existential vacuum, so I sympathize. And so were you reading Civil War as it came out? Was comics a big part of your life at that time?
So at that time, it was not. No, I grew up very much into comics. My dad was and is a comic book collector and was very into Marvel comics. And so I really grew up reading a lot of his old collection, which was like the late 1960s, 1970s stuff. And I poured over those. And that really got me into a lot of the stuff that he was into, which was Fantastic Four and the Avengers, Captain America, Daredevil, Spider-Man. And I liked that, but I think then when I went to college and started making like cool new friends, I was kind of like, comics are for kids, you know, because at that, you know, this was pre-Iron Man, the movie, the Robert Downey Jr. movie, so there wasn't really a lot happening in comics. And at the time, even at Marvel, it was kind of a creative dearth. There really wasn't a lot of interesting stuff to read in Marvel or DC at the time. Really, there were some little pockets of kind of interesting creative stuff, but it was a lot of like big explosions and girls with big boobs and tight. It was like it was not a really an interesting time to be a comic book reader until Civil War was really an attempt to change that trajectory for Marvel. So when I heard about this event, Civil War, that was happening and it sounded kind of interesting, I did go back into a comic book shop for the first time in years and picked it up. And I did not read it as it came out, but I picked. I started reading there towards the end, and got the paperback, the trade paperback when that came out, which I still have. I have it right in front of me.
Very nice. Yeah, it's funny because I was definitely not a comics reader, but I picked this paperback up because I feel like this story was like covered in the news. I remember like the New York Times wrote it up because I think mainly the element that in this story, Spider-Man reveals his secret identity for what I guess would be the first time.
Probably, yeah.
The character's history. And so it did. It felt like an event that crossed over into the sort of general consciousness in a way that I feel like you didn't tend to see in the 90s, early 2000s.
It's weird when like something like the Times or the Washington Post, a mainstream media, like every now and then they'll glom on to a big comic book event, and you have to think Marvel and DC just live for this stuff because it juices those very, very meager profit margins that they're working with. And I do think this one did, because you had the sort of twin fallouts of the Civil War event are Spider-Man reveals his identity to everybody, to the masses on TV, and Captain America dies. Captain America is shot and killed. And so the death of Captain America, which it's always weird when they decide the death of a character is a big event because it never lasts for very long. But every now and then they decide, sure, we'll give Marvel like a little bit of space on the 5th page of the Times, maybe, to talk about the death of one of their superheroes. And I think this was one of those times because it lasted for a little while, comparatively long, maybe in the life of a superhero death, life and death of a superhero character.
So this is the title Civil War has probably been sort of subsumed in a lot of people's minds by the movie. So for people who maybe have not the same familiarity with the comic, could you give us a little overview of what the story arc is here?
Sure. So 2006, this comes out, and it's the main event. There's always a bunch of little spinoffs, right? But the main event is written by this guy named Mark Millar, who at the time is a very, very hot, sort of edgy writer. He's known for, he has this sort of deconstructing mentality around his characters that sometimes can go a little too far. And then Steve McNiven is the artist, who's a very, very good artist. I really like Steve McNiven a lot. He's very talented. And it's somewhat similar to the movies. If you've seen the Captain America Civil War movie, it takes some notes from that. And that basically there's a very low level superhero team called the New Warriors, who only the most diehard Marvel fan would really know or care about. And in the very opening stages of the Civil War event, they attack this group of supervillains, and there's a big fight, and there's an explosion. There's an explosion that's near a school, and there's like 600 casualties. I believe there's 700 casualties, and it's remember, this is 2007, so it's still pretty reminiscent of 9/11, and they are not shy about that. And the fallout of all of this is very clearly meant to be analogous to the Patriot Act and a lot of the political things that were happening at this time, which comics had mostly shied away from in recent years. There was a time when comics were willing to get a little more political. They had kind of shied away from that in the 90s and early aughts, and this was a return to being a little more explicitly about what was going on in politics at that time. So on the one side, you have Captain America, who believes that superheroes should stay very free of government. The government shouldn't have anything to do with superheroes, because if they get too much control, then they can tell us who the bad guys are. And he has this strong libertarian streak, and he takes people like Daredevil and some of the X-Men and a lot of lower level Luke Cage, some of these like lower level street level heroes. And then on the other side, you have Iron Man, who believes that we need to be put in check and superheroes are going out of control, and we should all register with the government and basically work as like public service agents, and that'll help rebuild faith in superheroes following this, to make sure that we have accountability, and something like what happened with the New Warriors will never happen again. And they, just like in the movie, they eventually come to blows, and things go bad very fast. So that's the broad strokes of what happens in the Civil War. I guess plot wise, that's about as far as it goes. It gets pretty punchy throughout. Like, there's a lot of like wham pow stuff for what was ostensibly such a serious political comic at the time.
So I think one of the most notable elements here is you have what sure feels like every Marvel Comics character sort of mashed up here in different configurations. And how rare is it to get a crossover event that's this comprehensive? Is it precedent setting, or is there a precedent for that?
At the time, it was very rare. This was not something that was happening a lot. And this was a time when Marvel's fortunes were really in the gutter. Things were not looking good for Marvel, which is why at the time, as I think most people now know, they'd started selling the movie rights off to a lot of their characters sort of piecemeal. So Spider-Man went over to Sony, X-Men went over to Fox, and then they kept, at the time, in-house the Avengers. So characters like, and this is before the Disney takeover. And they just did that because they needed money. So they were selling their parts off for scraps, basically. And this really was an attempt to kind of get people like me, who had grown up reading these comics, well, how can we get them all back? And if we make something that's more serious, kind of adult, is talking about real issues, is reminiscent of 9/11, is that going to be enough to get some of these people who had maybe drifted away in the 90s and early aughts? Is that enough to bring them back? So it was a real swing for the fences. It does happen. It wasn't the first time or even the third or fourth time. And in DC Comics, the distinguished competition, had done this to great success with its Final Crisis, which was a very, very well-regarded crossover event. Marvel had tried to do this a few times and had never had quite the same success, but they really felt like Mark Millar would be the guy who could sort of make that happen. He had the prestige, he had the heat behind him. He'd been able to make some characters that had not had a lot of success in a while become pretty readable, interesting characters. And so this was their attempt to do that. And now this happens multiple times a year. It's very, very common to get a big crossover event because if you want to keep up with what's going on, if you just want to follow the X-Men or whatever, well, then they bring him into some other big event that involves the Avengers and Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, and then you got to start reading them all again. So it works, but it can be pretty irritating.
Is that any consequence of the sort of ubiquity of the movies, or is that just the way the trend has swung?
I think the movies, sort of. I don't know. That's an interesting question. The movies and the comics aren't quite as linked as people think a lot of times that they are if you're not reading a lot of comics. But they do, whenever there's a new movie out, they will relaunch whatever that title is with a new kind of rock star created. Like the Eternals, when the Eternals came out, they did Eternals issue #1 all over again and brought in a really a great creative team behind them that creatively the comic series was far more satisfying than the movie was. Obviously if you saw the movie. So that's not uncommon. But the fact really is that the salad days for places like Marvel Comics and DC Comics are really over because they are not making a lot of money right now. But the movies are making money hand over fist. So comic creators are in sort of a difficult, strange place where, on the one hand, these characters have never been more popular. On the other hand, nobody's ever cared less about the source material of these. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. So you mentioned Mark Millar. Can you talk to me a little bit about him? I'm familiar with him from some of, I think, the work that came after this, but sort of, does he have style or trademarks, anything like that?
So he was at this point during the 90s, you have I'd call it the rise of the edgelord in comics. This is a time when this was really right after a time when characters like Deadpool and Spawn and Witchblade became very, very popular characters. And I think a lot of teenagers and maybe people with some delayed adolescence really liked that these comics grew up in that particular way. They were very, very violent. They were very mature in a way that immature people think of mature being. It's very grating now to read it, but it was selling. It made a lot of money. And Marvel was really trying to tap into all this, but also a lot of their biggest, edgiest creators, as soon as they achieved success at Marvel, would go on and do their own thing somewhere else, independently or at a different studio, and had a lot more success there. So Mark Millar comes in, and he sort of finds a way to take a lot of classic Marvel characters and respin them in new, edgier way and make them kind of stay true to the character that people grew up with, but also do a new spin on them. A great example would be this series called The Ultimates, which is we're getting into separate universe stuff here, but there was a separate universe, a pocket universe that was not the mainline Marvel continuity, where the Ultimates were the Avengers, and the Ultimates were edgy, and the Ultimates were sleeping with each other and chopping off heads, and it was very deconstructing, and I was not a fan of it, and I'm still not a fan of it. I think it had some interesting ideas, and then it just pushed them all way too far and became very in a very self-conscious way, very adult and grown up and silly to the point where it got stupid. But then when he came back to Civil War, which did take place in the mainline Marvel continuity, meaning if what happened in here presumably will take place and will have ramifications for the rest of Marvel Comics, he tried to dial it in, and he has said in interviews, was really interested in trying to explore the liberal-conservative divide through the lens of superheroes. That's what he wanted to do with this, and Iron Man is pitched as sort of this neocon George W. Bush type character in terms of the overreach that he wanted to level on society at the time, and Captain America is maybe more of a. This is where his premise is not very successful, because it doesn't really. There's a lot of ways in which it does not work. Because Captain America is sort of pitched as a liberal, but maybe a small government liberal of some kind, or like a social libertarian fiscal. I mean, it doesn't. It breaks down pretty quickly because of the necessities of the plot. But that was his idea. That's what he wanted to do. So this became a trademark of Mark Millar's, trying to map real world politics into the comics he was writing, and things frequently start out with maybe a really good idea but get pretty muddy the longer he works on them.
Sure. So what was the reception to this thing? I feel like you mentioned when we were first talking off mic that this was not received sort of as rapturously as they might have hoped.
Well, critically, it was not. That's correct. Financially, it did quite well. It sold a lot of books. I believe, if I remember right, at the end of the year, the top 5 best-selling comics of that year were the 5 issues of Civil War that came out in the year. So I think it really did, as far as Marvel was concerned, deliver on what they had hoped for, and kind of kept them alive. You know, at that point, they were just trying to stay alive a little bit longer, and then Iron Man 1 happened, and that's not a concern of theirs anymore. But my understanding is, as just looking over some of the Wikipedia articles before this, that they were happy with sales, and that shows by the fact that they have continued to try to do more of these crossover events since then, because I think it really worked for them. The legacy, the critical legacy, the literary legacy, the even the fan legacy in a lot of ways is not very positive, and I don't think it is remembered very fondly, despite the fact that everybody went to go see it. Sort of this, maybe the Snyder's JLA of its time. Like, everybody knows about it, everybody went to see it. Hard to find a lot of fans out there outside of maybe kind of a core, very noisy few at the center of it.
Sure. So what would you attribute that to? Is it the sort of, as you say, that it politically breaks down a little bit, or how often it lapses into the punching? I think
there's a few things that didn't work about Civil War in hindsight. And I think the big problem is that it really wants to pit Captain America and Iron Man as it wants to both sides of these guys, right? They both have really good points, and it's hard everybody has to pick a side, which the movie really marketed to great effect. Whose team are you on? Are you Team Cap and Team Iron Man? And I think did so a little more successfully than the comic did. But the comic, if you read the series, really has to completely change the characterization of these people to make them work, and erase decades of characterization for a lot of these guys. The idea of Iron Man being a big government stooge is really hard to swallow if you've been following Tony Stark up to that point, who was he was this playboy, and he was a badass, and he didn't care what anybody thought. He was going to do things his own way, and no matter what anybody else thought. And so for him to start, very quickly and without much internal wrestling that we see on panel, decide that this is the way to go, that he has to go as far as fighting his friends, waging a war against his old buddies to get them to sign up and take the badge of big government, feels very out of character. And the things he does, he becomes really a straight up villain by the end. And the comic sympathies are very clearly on the side of Captain America. And that's fine. That's understandable to have a protagonist. But in this case, to take somebody like Iron Man, who was seen as such a hero and still has, and was about to become the biggest superhero that Marvel has ever had, and make him a really straight up bad guy who some heroes die because of some of the works that he does, and Captain America ends up dying at the end. It felt like a real betrayal of the character. And then I do think some of it too is just the muddied politics of it. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The lines he's trying to draw to explain the difference between what a Republican at that time, especially, and a Democrat were like, neither of these characters really fit that, which could have been a perk, which could have been a way to, say something kind of interesting about the different ways that politics can unite and divide and split over time, and the different ways the spectrum we can fall on the spectrum with ideas that don't really work for either party or either side of that political divide. except for it very clearly thought that's not what it was doing. It thought it was drawing a real clear analog to the two-party system in the U.S. and ended up tripping over itself by the end. In the very end, the last thing that happens is there's a big fight, and Captain America's team kind of has Iron Man's team on the ropes. It looks like they're about to win, and then Captain America looks around in horror at New York City. At the cities are falling apart, and everybody's fighting, and he realizes that they've become the very thing they wanted to protest. So he surrenders. He gives up and goes into custody. And it works. It's kind of poignant. And then a short time later, he is assassinated on his way to trial. He's shot in the back, which is the death of Captain America, which lasted a year, 2 years. I can't remember. Not super long.
So something that sort of struck me is, as you mentioned, the story feels weighted towards the Captain America side. The character that struck me, though, as the audience surrogate is Spider-Man.
Sure.
Peter Parker seems to me he starts off on Iron Man's side, ends up switching over to Captain America's side, and I don't know. That just seems like the character that is easiest for us to project ourselves onto, and maybe sort of historically. So what is the status of Spider-Man at this point in the Marvel sort of world? He's not still a teenager, right? He's an adult man. He's married. Yeah. He's living with Aunt May and Mary Jane and MJ. They're in New York City, and he is an interesting one because this is post the first Tobey Maguire movie, at least maybe the first two. I think might even be post all three.
We might have a whole Tobey Maguire trilogy on our hands, but
coinciding at least. Yeah,
I think pretty close to that. So Spider-Man definitely is still a very high profile, very successful character, and Peter Parker has always been the easiest, most down to earth audience surrogate for this, and he does play sort of a turncoat here in that he sort of inexplicably starts off with Iron Man, and there's the very big, very famous comic book moment where he goes on national TV and he unmasks himself to prove that he is not afraid. He's proud of what he does, and he's willing to go under government accountability, which very quickly goes awry for him, and he starts to get very jaded with Team Iron Man's side. So he switches over to Team Captain America and works for them from then on out. That has a lot of, on the one, I think the big thing there is superhero comics have always had sort of a complicated relationship with the idea of a secret identity. It used to be the whole thing. That was the main plot device going all the way back to Action Comics 1 with Superman. Is you see this guy flying around, he's strong, he's a creature from an alien from another world, and then at the very end, the big reveal is that at the end of the day, he puts his glasses on and his hat on, and he's mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent. So that's always been very key to it, and Spider-Man took it to another level because he hides his entire face behind it because he's so concerned about the people he loves and cares about, because the very first thing that ever happened to him was Uncle Ben died, and he sees that as his fault and his responsibility to never let that happen to anybody else ever again. So the idea of him revealing who he was for a comic book reader, especially for a Spider-Man fan, who I don't need to tell anybody here, the Spider-Man fans are very passionate and very outspoken about how they feel about Spider-Man. It was very controversial, but Marvel kind of enjoyed that. That was planned controversy. This was something they knew was going to get a lot of people's attention, and it did. But like a lot of the supposedly big ramifications of this event, it did not last very long. He was quickly able to magic things back to the way they were before he revealed himself, and which that happened in the movie as well, in the most recent one, right? He goes back to being hidden, having a secret identity again.
That sort of, it's the term is the illusion of change, right? Is that Stan Lee's term?
That's Stan Lee's term.
That? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Things have to change for a story to go on, but they can't change because people have expectations. So very rarely in comic book, very, very rarely do things actually last. Do changes happen that last for a long time?
I noticed there's a lot of a recurring sort of verbal motif throughout here is characters reminding each other it's not the 40s anymore, implying that things were morally simpler back then. And are murkier now. Is there any sense there, do you think, of Marvel sort of reckoning with its own history at all? And, have things gotten more complicated to create these comics within the world?
I think so. And I'd be interested. I had not noticed that was I've not thought about it that way, but that's probably true, isn't it? I think it probably, because Captain America, who was created before Marvel even existed, he predates Marvel, was obviously a World War II figure. And I think there is this idea, and this is again a case where you can see that maybe Mark Millar was not the right person to interrogate this, because of course things aren't more complicated now. Things have always been very, very complicated, and American government made terrible decisions during World War II, just like it makes terrible decisions today. But I think that for the sake of telling a story, it always gets so tough when you try to tell real world stories about real stuff with this medium, because it just doesn't always work very well. As soon as you start introduce characters like this into the world, you're like, well, why did 9/11 happen? Why couldn't Superman have stopped it if he can do anything? Or why can't all these brilliant scientists cure cancer? Or if you had Wonder Woman around during World War II, then why did the Holocaust happen? Like, it gets very, very thorny when you start introducing plot elements like this, which is why it's good. I think these comics can and do speak really well to real world things like bigotry, things like responsibility and power, the famous Spider-Man issue. I think that even the most recent Batman movie with Matt Reeves, with Robert Pattinson, did a really good job of kind of exploring the idea of hope and despair and obsession. But these are very these are emotions, right? These are principles. These are ideas that we wrestle with. And I think actually trying to wrestle with things like President George W. Bush and the Patriot Act and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think that's where it's so easy for things to go awry, and kind of offensively awry too. Like, you can end up unintentionally, I think for the most part, offending people and coming across as very, very trite and simplistic. Like you see a lot now online with people who have a severe case of Marvel brain talking about like, oh man, I wish Captain America would have suited up and got in there on January 6th or something like that. And you're like, well, we can keep these two things separate.
Probably for the best. I was wondering, does the political world of the Marvel universe have sort of a political bent? Is the president in this book a Republican or a Democrat, or is he just like generic president?
It's really inconsistent on that point, and Civil War does not say. They usually will not show the president, or they'll show an outline of the president. There's a few very notable exceptions to this. Mark Millar did write one of them. It was not Civil War, but he had Magneto, the X-Men villain, attack the White House and take it over basically. And I think George W. Bush is like on the front lawn of the White House in his boxers or something, and Magneto is glowering over him. So things like that do happen. There's a famous Captain America comic from the Nixon era where he confronts President Nixon, who is then masked as like a villain, like a very villainous figure, which was a very strong political statement for Marvel at the time, though not particularly controversial, because it was well to the point that people had really soured on the Nixon administration. But so these things do happen. It's probably safe to say that Marvel has a generally sort of liberal bent to its politics, tends to usually take the side and it has always taken the side of like acceptance and inclusion, and sort of like, it doesn't get explicitly political in terms of like who should control the means of production or anything like that, but it will wade into those waters occasionally, and sometimes I think sort of successfully. But I think it takes a really, really smart, gifted, creative team to do that, and a very brave leadership team behind them. And Marvel has been a little bit spotty on one or the other a lot of times in the past, which I think has just made them all the more wary. But the exceptions to that are there and really good and powerful. And it happens a lot in the X-Men comics in particular, which tend to get far more political just by nature of being about a marginalized group who's hated and feared by humanity.
Of course. Not a lot of X-Men presence in this.
No.
I think Wolverine is there at one of the sort of meetings at the beginning, but and Emma Frost pops up to deliver some significant lines, I guess.
Really good scene with her. I think I like that scene.
Yeah, there was something that jumped out to me there, and I'm blanking on it now.
She has Tony Stark comes to her, I believe, and she is the leader. Emma Frost is the leader of the X-Men at this point, and he asks her to join his side. And she basically says, "Where were you when?" She references all the time that mutants have been oppressed by humanity, or in some cases murdered, mass murdered by the government, and that Iron Man and the Avengers weren't there, didn't show up, or didn't speak up, or didn't help them. And I think that's that was a well-handled use of the mutant metaphor, as they call it, the idea of a marginalized group, and pretty chilling too, kind of a potent word to Tony Stark at that time. I liked it.
Yeah. So is there anything that I feel like is there anything that you feel like I've missed that we haven't gotten a chance to touch on?
No, I don't think so. I think it's this series is like, I think, important without being particularly good is probably how I'd say it. It did leave a legacy, and I think it probably did open the door for a lot more sort of maybe mature commentary type comics to work their way in that were maybe more successful than Civil War did, and I'm glad for that. And I feel like I've said a lot of negative things about comics, and I read a lot of comics now. I'm very much a comic book reader and collector, and that includes Marvel comics. But I think that this one just didn't really land. I think because it was sort of facile in its understanding of the political situation at the time. But I think a lot of us were. It's so hard. If the past years have taught us nothing else, it's so hard to be prescient about the moment that you're in politically, because it's so easy to get swept up in the narrative and the one side or the other, and you're working with the information you have at the time, which often turns out not to be the full picture. And I think that Mark Millar was, and this is true, I think he was very righteous in what he wanted to convey. I think he was very concerned about the overreach of the Patriot Act and of the Bush administration. I think he was right to be so. And I think that this was an attempt to at least sound off to Marvel comic books readers to be careful about the laws that are being enacted right now. And we were supposed to follow the responsible, principled stance of Captain America, who said that our freedom, our freedom is more important than this, and we need to hold true to our ideals. I think that's all really good, and I'm glad he stood for that. And I don't mean to knock any of that. I just think that if you're going to do that, you've got to be really, really careful too about the other issues that you raise up. And I don't think that this threaded that needle as well as it could. And I think a lot of its problems are more have to do with plot and narrative than with actual political ideology. I think it's just maybe a little bit clumsily constructed of an actual story, despite the intentions, which I do think are good. And I think probably for Marvel at the time was sort of a brave stance to take, was sort of this was a risk, and I don't discount the fact that it was a risk. And there were other things going on at Marvel at the time that I think were better and more successful. And I think those things have lasted. And like most things in comic books, the things that weren't all that good get swept under the rug in pretty short order. And you, like you said, the illusion of change, you get back to zero and you start over, which they did. They even did a second Civil War. Civil War Part 2 came out just ahead of the Captain Marvel movie a few years ago. And it was much worse than the first one.
Oh,
so I think they learned all the wrong lessons from the first Civil War. But there's also been a lot of really great. I really love what Marvel's doing right now with the X-Men, for example. I think it's really beautiful, really powerful story they're telling there. So, further on and further up and further in with the comic book world.
So this is one that goes in the time capsule for sort of significance rather than personal favoritism.
I think so. Yeah. I was interested when we reached out about doing this, about talking about 2007. I looked at all the events happening. There weren't really a whole lot of major comic book events happening at this time that I could find. But after 2007, you have stuff that starts coming really fast because the movies start taking off and comics start pedaling faster to keep up with the movies. So things do take a pretty quick turn. And it's what comes after Civil War, and after some of the cleanup to Civil War, which there is a lot of, there's the Spider-Man arc that they use to get him back to having a secret identity is called One More Day and is widely reviled by Spider-Man fans. They do not like that story because it's very silly. But what happens after they get things back to zero is really, there's a lot of really good stuff, and there's a lot of new creative teams launched, and I think it starts a new era for what you felt like you maybe could talk about in comic books and places you could go with some of these characters. And there are more eyeballs on them now because A, Civil War was financially successful, and B, I think the movies did get some people back to a comic book shop to be like, oh, I wonder what's going on with Iron Man these days. And if you did that after that movie, you were in for a pretty good time. There was some pretty good stuff that came after that. So not a great event, interesting in its themes, but did set the stage for a lot of good stuff that came after that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing this. Is there anything that you would like to plug before we let you go?
Let's see. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Tyler Huckabee. All one word there. I work for Relevant Magazine. I'm senior editor over there. We just put out our spring issue, just came out, so you can go check that out there. I got to interview Ryan Reynolds for that, so that's pretty cool. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's all I got right now. Love to talk to anybody else. If anybody disagrees with me about Civil War, I'm sorry. I don't like to trash something that somebody else really loved. I thought the movie was better than the series. I thought the movie fixed a lot of the problems that the comic series had. Not a perfect movie, certainly had its flaws, but found maybe a better way to address some of this stuff. So you can talk to me about the movie if you like.
What a Year is produced by me, Ethan Warren, with original music by my co-host Ryan Pollie. Thanks to Brian Rosemeyer for the mixing and mastering, and Shane Butler and the good folks at Portray Me for our artwork. Please take a few minutes to follow us on your podcasting app of choice, and while you're doing that, if you could leave a quick rating and a review, it really does make a difference. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at What a Year Pod. On our next episode, we'll be talking about Edgar Wright's Hot Fuzz and MGMT's Oracular Spectacular, plus Tracy Lett's August Osage County with playwright MJ Halberstadt. It's going to be a good one.